Hello, everyone, and welcome to March 2023 meetup of Romania Power BI and Modern Excel user group. Thank you all for joining for the third meetup of this year with another very special guest today presenting to our user group. Thank you, Reid, for accepting our invitation. For our newest members, my name is Cristian Angel and I will be your host today. We'll go quickly through our usual introductory slides presenting our next scheduled meetups. Then Reid will take the stage for the featured session. A short Q&A at the end, or maybe during the session. We'll see how it goes. And then we'll have the monthly ROPAG Enterprise DNA raffle, our primary official sponsor. And more on this, I will tell you a bit later. This is my usual slide in terms of how we organize and for the recording. Please make sure that during the session your microphone is muted and the video is turned off so we can record everything and have no issues. Please type your questions in the chat area. Use a Q in front, a Q column in front, so we can spot them easier. If you have any problem with the internet connection, please drop off and rejoin. Teams is still working, recording, and please be advised that this meeting is recorded. This note is actually for me, so I don't forget to start the recording. But anyway, if you don't want to appear on our YouTube channel afterwards, please be advised that this is a recorded meeting. In terms of our next meetups in April, on the 27th, we'll also have an online meetup with the one and only Oz du Soleil. This will be something special, as Oz said. Just a hint, we'll be doing together the session. So I will work with Oz combining Excel and Power BI. And then in May, we have Sue Bass as our special guest with an introduction to using paginated reports from Power BI. I'm really looking forward to this session because there are a lot of use cases when the end user just wants a table with data, and it's a really good opportunity to learn how to do paginated reports, especially that now we have it available with Pro licenses. If you want to see all our past recordings, you can just go to our YouTube channel. If you go to bit.ly/ropag_history, you will see all our recordings. Now, coming back to the Enterprise DNA raffle, since August 2021, we have a long-lasting, valuable partnership with Enterprise DNA. They became our primary official sponsor. They have some incredible learning resources on their portal, and on every meetup, we have two complete packages, membership and analyst hub combo for our every meetup for our users. And in order to get one of them, you only have to register for the raffle with a form that you can either scan the QR code here or go to one of the links that you have. Register for the raffle, and then you will be entering the raffle in the end. I'm telling you, the resources you have there are invaluable for any Power BI aficionado, let's say like this. And don't worry, I will put the link in the chat during the session if you haven't had the chance to scan it now. Coming back to our session today, it is with great pleasure that I introduce our special guest, Reid Heavens, to this ROPAG meetup. Welcome again, Reid, and thank you again for accepting our invitation.
Absolutely.
Good morning to you, as I know it's pretty early, and you're just starting your day. And
yeah, it's not too bad. It's just 9:30 a.m. here, my time, and 7:30 p.m. Your time, 19:30.
Yeah. Well, last month we had Chandu from New Zealand, and he was starting at 6 a.m. his time. So it's Decent. At 9:30, it's decent.
I didn't realize he was in New Zealand. For some reason, I thought he was in Canada, but okay, so he lives down in New Zealand.
Yeah.
Okay.
Here we are after more than 1 year since we've first met at SQL Bits in London. When we first discussed about this session, after a year of anticipation, we are finally able to have this session today, and I'm really happy.
Oh yeah, I'm glad we were able to meet at both SQL Bits. It was it's I mean, as you can agree with, it's one of my favorite activities per year as far as conferences go. It's a really good conference.
Yeah, and I just attended only the last day this year and the party, but I will probably make sure I'll get the entire conference next year. Anyway, for who doesn't know Reid, he's a Microsoft MVP, a renowned expert in the field of data analytics and visualization with a wealth of experience in Power BI. He's the founder and CEO of Heavens Consulting, a company that specializes in helping organizations harness the power of data. Reid is also a well-known speaker and trainer, having delivered talks and workshops at numerous events around the world, like SQL Bits, like other conferences. His sessions are always engaging, informative, and thought-provoking, and I'm confident that today's presentation will be no exception. Just like many others, I've learned a lot from Reid over the last few years as I follow his work ever since he was blogging on Power Pivot Pro, which is P3 Adaptive now. So without further ado, let's give him a warm welcome as he'll be showing us how to avoid common pitfalls in Power BI models and reports. The stage is yours, Reid.
All right, let me go ahead and here I can actually share. Here we go. This one. And can you see the screen?
Yes.
Perfect.
And I see
it's the slide.
The slide and your costume. I was just remembering the costume from SQL Bits.
There, yeah, I have it in my it's in my closet now. That I think at some point I need to do. Probably for Halloween, I'm gonna do a YouTube video, where maybe I'll just I'll have that on while I'm doing my tutorial.
You should.
On something Halloween related. Yeah, exactly. The wizard cape and everything. But yes, thank you for the introductions. What we'll be talking about today is a lot of the common kind of anti-patterns or pitfalls that people make in reporting. This comes often because I have to be given usually a file from a client where they're just like, hey, can you make this better? Well, what does better mean? We don't really know, but we just know that your reports look better than ours, or maybe they're smaller and faster. And can you just figure out what's needed to be fixed and fix it? So there's going to be an emphasis kind of on the front end, the reporting, because that's kind of my specialty. But we'll talk about just a lot of these common patterns that I see and mistakes that people make, where it's not necessarily wrong, but there are better ways to do something, ways to enhance or increase user experiences. So that's kind of the idea of what we'll be talking about.
One moment, you are muted, Reid. Let me unmute you, if I can. I can't.
Interesting. Somehow it muted me. Okay. Good. All good again?
No, it's okay. It was only just before switching the slide.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I wonder how it muted. Perfect. So we'll continue then. Yeah, I've been doing data analytics for about 11 years, as you can see from the avatar here at the top. Something that a nickname that was given to me by a colleague years ago was the VizWiz, visualization wizard, and it stuck, and I felt that was a great kind of persona to embody. So I decided to kind of embrace that and lean into that with most of my YouTube videos. A lot of the tutorials that I do focuses on design and aesthetics. I definitely do everything within Microsoft and the Power Platform, but that's kind of my foot in the door, so to speak, with a lot of client scenarios before I go into modeling and DAX and Power Query and everything else that really benefits from needing to build reports for clients. But this is my 104th presentation that I've given between pre-cons, presentations, trainings, or any other kind of public event. So I've done a few at this point, over the last few years. Yeah, just a little bit. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, that's a little bit about me, and there we go. Here's some of the things that we'll be talking about. So we're going to go into discussing and reviewing kind of the reader mode interactions, a little bit about enhancing visualizations and design with the ability coming into it. And where's my, I don't have a laser pointer, but I'll use my mouse. So there we go. Inspecting bookmarks, tuning Power Query as well. Also kind of looking at relationships and some of the model design, and time permitting, maybe even some DAX optimization. But as I mentioned, I focus a lot on the reporting perspective, so that's where I want to start the conversations on. So one thing that I think is very important for reviewing and auditing reports is really understanding how can we craft the user experience. It's something that I think is overlooked a lot, and it can be very beneficial for people who are wanting to enhance the experience and simplify it to a degree. The Power BI report by default very much is kind of an everything, everywhere, all at once scenario, to quote a movie title. And it gives you too many buttons, too many actions, too many pop-ups and things to click. And many of them which are either useless, broken, or can confuse the user. So we'll talk a lot about what defaults can we set, such as some of the things that we see here on the page, everything from your pages to your slicer selections, sort orders, all those things that can be set and configured to shorten the path from opening the report to getting to the final results. Lots of different things can be configured. Two big ones are visual header options and filtering. Both of those are very important things to configure and curate when you are building out reports, just because the default experiences might not necessarily be the best for the type of data or the way that the visuals communicate. So you really want to think about between two objects, like how do you want things to filter? How do you want these items to work, and what's the best method for the end users to interact with these? Coming to that idea of between visual headers and filters. So the filters pane is something that is can be very useful for the end user. It obviously lets us collect and have a pop out for various filters that can be interacted with, but it's important to kind of design those accordingly for what the user should be using. So we have report, we have page, and we have visual level filters. Generally speaking, we can consider these to be kind of report viewer filters versus developer filters. Commonly, developer filters are what you want to have hidden. It doesn't make sense for the report consumer to come in, click on one visual at a time, apply a filter, and then have to do that 15 different times. So those are the kind of experiences that we want to help design and curate, and hiding those as well, so the end user doesn't see them when they are using the report, because then it can cause confusion and complications. So we'll see that during the demo on how to configure this to make a cleaner, more intuitive filter experience. Along those lines as well, for any developer filters, if there are certain things that we need to apply to a visual, such as like a top 5 filter, often we're going to want to probably lock and hide that to make sure that it is configured in a way that isn't going to confuse or interfere with the user experience when someone is looking at the report. So let's take an example and look at this. So if we're applying a top 10 filter on a particular visualization, if it's applied, but it's not locked or hidden, if it's visible, then what you end up with is situations where you'll have the visual header icon for whatever filters are applied showing up here. So now what we have is redundancy. Both the title is implying that, but also this filter listing here. And my general recommendation for a lot of this is that the filter list that we have per visual, filters and slicers affecting this visual, that should be limited to only filters that the user can adjust. Now, most of the time when we apply a top N to a visual, we're not planning for the user to clear it, to change the number, or do anything else. It's usually not a user configurable filter, so we would want to lock and hide that and keep it in the title. So a better scenario would be having that hidden on the page itself, and then we're given options where we will have that filter list cleaned up and the developer filters are hidden, but the name of the visual itself still shows us what's being applied or filtered. Page views by top 10 site pages. So that way, when they see this list empty, they know they haven't made a filter selection on the page. They haven't clicked a slicer yet. So it keeps this a lot cleaner and more transparent on what they have done versus what the developer has done. So a lot of curation goes into designing the filter pane in parallel with however we're going to be configuring the visuals and what filters are being applied to them. And again, along those lines of like the icons that can show up onto a visual, we have all these header icons that are available per visual. And as you can see from this list, there's a lot of icons that can be included in visualizations. So depending on the visual you have, there's many different icons that can benefit from either being visible or hidden. Think of a scenario where you have like a single value card. The focus mode for a single value card is something that probably isn't going to be needed necessarily. Like it full screens the visual. You don't really need a full screen version of a card with one number on it. A chart makes more sense, other visuals like that, but focus mode is largely unnecessary for a lot of visuals that have it. It looks broken. So what icons are relevant to what visual? Do we need the icons to show up at all? So that will be another thing that we'll talk about during the demo, but these we want to turn off as many as possible. So there's a term in English, at least, it's called the KISS methodology, which stands for keep it simple, stupid. It's something that I learned in tech probably 10 years ago. When it comes to code, when it comes to UI, pick a topic, pick anything related to work, the simpler, the better. You want the least complicated thing possible to deliver the results of whatever it is.
Working everywhere. The KISS method.
Yeah, exactly.
Works.
Well, the thing that like recently to this to this concept is apparently like just as a quick anecdote, like when Elon Musk bought Twitter earlier this year, one of the ways he was reviewing the quality of his employees was how many lines of code they've written, and he was giving higher rankings to the employees who wrote more code, not less, which is the exact opposite of what you want.
Exactly.
If I hire a coder who can write something in 20 lines versus 100, and they're both equally as fast, you obviously want 20 lines of code. So I thought that was somewhat comical that the quality of the employee was based off of more code, not less. Same with the report. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, 100%. And the same with the report design is we want as little buttons, as few pop-ups as possible. So I'm talking about this holistically, and we'll see kind of examples of this in the demo, but it's important to kind of consider those. And one mention here is today, any configurations to these icons can only be observed in reader mode. So that's basically the viewer mode in the service. In a workspace, in an app, when a report viewer is looking at the report in a browser, that is reader mode. Edit mode is Power BI desktop or edit mode in the service, but there is no way to preview reader mode in desktop today. So it is kind of hard to configure these because when you design all of this, everything that you see over here isn't going to show up until you publish the report. So I'm going to show you some better ways to accomplish this. I will also say there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Later on this year with some other updates for Power BI, we will be getting a reader mode preview in desktop. So there will be a button to preview these changes, but today it's not possible in desktop to see the final result that the end user will see. It's only something we can see in the Power BI service. So something to consider. All right. And like I mentioned, commonly recommended to hide icons that do not provide additional functionality. The last thing that I'll mention too, that's a very useful visual header tooltip is the help tooltip icon. So that will provide a visualization, some information that explains details about the visual. It's something that basically is a little text box that can provide some useful text-based tooltip information up to about 250 characters, or you can attach it to a report tooltip page. But think of it like just explainer text. It's a little bit of information that can provide some context about the visual or information contained within. Very useful when needed. All right, so what I'm going to do now is switch over to browser. Let me share that screen. window, and this one. Beautiful. Okay. So the review process today is essentially, as I'm going to be showing you, it's somewhat of a manual auditing process. There are a couple of other tools that are useful for this, but to a degree, there is a bit of a manual scan that you need to do when reviewing a report. And that's the things that I want to do is I want to put on the hat for me as the report viewer and see what does the experience look like when I'm moving around for these things. So what are the pop-ups? So I'm going to start from the middle here, and slicers are a great example. Slicers in general should look pretty seamless. There shouldn't be any extra pop-ups. They should give me a list of things to select from. This slicer lets me change the values on the page, but generally speaking, the things that I don't want to see are header icons. Most of these aren't necessary for a slicer. Like, I don't need to see what filters are being applied to this slicer. This is the thing applying filters to other objects. So most of these icons aren't necessary. That one I don't find useful. Focus mode certainly is not useful for a slicer. That's very confusing for some people when they click this. Like, what just happened to my report? So a lot of these extra little features, adding a comment, like spotlighting, none of these things really add any value. So these are use cases where we would want to have these hidden, and then, like the slicers above it, have a much more seamless integration to that. So as I mentioned, the only way to make changes to this normally would be you go back to Power BI Desktop, you make a change. You have to save the file, you have to republish to the workspace, you have to refresh the browser. When you do that, as you can imagine, that's a lot of cyclical back and forth. So today, the best practice for this, honestly, you go to edit mode up here. This brings you to the edit environment, and you can make some of those changes. So one thing is here for the slicer, like I will make a choice to say that, generally speaking, I just turn off header icons entirely. So under general, you can flip that off, go back to reading view, click save. The changes have been observed here, and let's assume I've done a bunch of edits. I've made a whole lot of changes all over the place. This is where you can come up to file. You can click download this file. So you can download a copy of the changes you've made, put that back into OneDrive, SharePoint, GitHub, Azure DevOps, wherever the source control versioning of this file needs to go. You can go ahead and place it into there. But otherwise, this is the fastest way that I have found today to kind of make these types of changes. I've heard some conversations and birds talking about something kind of like the best practices analyzer and tabular editor. More of a report practices analyzer might be coming out later this year that can actually scan the layout file and identify bad patterns for you to find automatically. I will happily support that when I can see something like that comes out, but there is still a bit of a manual process for reviewing. But hopefully there is some automation stuff. Yeah, exactly. It will be quite useful if that comes out later this year. But those are the things that I want you to look for is, as you're testing through this, what pop-ups are showing up. So here's another one. If you're using shapes as a background object, and there's debate on schools of thought for this, I only have 2 boxes in my entire page. So technically they slow down the report a little bit, like 20 milliseconds added to that. But I have 1 box here, and I have 1 box as the background for my title section. 2 single objects. I'm not going to go through the extra effort of making a background image that has all these built into it for just 2 objects. It's harder to move, harder to resize. I personally don't mind just using a couple extras, but we want to ensure that if we have a background object, you don't get these little icons showing up to, again, like I don't need to spotlight the background object. That's things that would be junk or artifacts that we don't want. So every time that we have these little icons showing up, do we need these? Does an image need to be pinned? Do you need to be able to spotlight a bookmark? So these are those other icons that we want to get rid of. I'm going to go ahead and come back to here. There's that background object here. Turn off the icons, bookmark, turn off, image, turn off. I want as few icons and as few pop-ups anywhere on my page to show up. And now you can move your mouse around. I'm touching all sorts of hit points and nothing is showing up. So this now seems like a single unit and we're not getting all these extra pop-ups. And I'm amazed like how many reports that I see that have these. Like it might be the most beautiful report that I've seen. Clearly an artist spent a ton of time designing it. And then as soon as you hover over these elements, you start getting all these icons just popping up everywhere. And I think it really breaks the experience. it makes it seem like a lot more like you've assembled a bunch of random Lego pieces together, but they're not really blended in that case. So the lack of icons makes all these pieces seem like a single unit. So that's what we want to do, is we want to eliminate distractions or anything that is not going to be valuable to the end user. Now, on top of turning off the icons holistically, we can also consider like what icons do we want to show for some components of it. So I have on the cards here at the top, here is an example of a help tooltip. This is useful. It provides information related to the card and explains what that card is doing. So I want that, but some other icons that are common is copy as image with caption. So is that useful to have a snapshot of a card? I would argue probably not necessarily for a card. Maybe a visual might benefit from a snapshot. Somebody wants to take a picture of it, put it into an email. Cards probably less likely. So think about each single icon that you have showing up for a particular visual and if it's necessary. So those can be turned off one by one under the icon section. So all of these can be enabled or disabled. So I don't want to comment. I don't want to copy. All I want is the help tooltip icon for this card. Bring it back. There we go. And now we just get the one icon that's relevant to it. We have the single help tooltip icon. Everything else is hidden. So even down to the curation of what icons are relevant, carefully consider each one of these. I will have Mike Carlo on a live stream of mine next month. He just released a new version of his Power BI theme generator. This is actually one thing that's going to be part of that customization. So every single visual that's in the native visual, in the native visuals, you can actually configure the header icon. So I've at some point need to sit down and create a new theme file, but I'm eventually going to have him on the stream and hopefully release like a best practices Power BI theme file that you can use in your reports. And for cards, there'll be certain icons turned off. By default, slicers won't have their header, visual header turned on. So you can basically now use his little theme generator to customize those yourself. And Christian, if you can maybe drop the link to the Power BI tips theme generator, maybe in the description. It's super useful. He has kind of like a new paid 2 versions of it. There's a free version, and then for I think $1 or $2 a month, it's $1 or $2 a month. It gives you the ability to save your changes online. So you can basically save your template and come back and edit it later. And you get a live preview of your changes. So on the upper right, as you're like, let's assume you're making bar chart changes. You make the changes in the attributes and all the little drop downs. You see a demo bar chart basically loaded and embedded over on the right that shows you when you change the title, the title color changes, the bar color changes. So you actually see instant results of what that formatting change will look like before you download it. So it's a really, really, really cool theme generator tool. And I believe every single piece of documentation that just came out, because Microsoft released a master list of all attributes that can be adjusted in a theme file. He has some tool that basically automatically scrapes that and then builds it into his tool. So every single exposed piece of editable thing, setting that can be done, he has like 500 different adjustments in the theme file. So you could easily spend a few hours figuring out what defaults you want, but very, very cool tool.
It can be daunting if you go into details.
Exactly. And like, that's one of the reasons I eventually want to build a master theme file myself, and hopefully share that out with the community where like, here's something that will get you 90% of what you want based off of all these practices that I'm talking about. I just need to sit down for like 2 hours and go through every attribute and think about exactly what I want. But just a quick mention,
just answered
super
my
useful
question
tool.
in the chat, and thank you for that. There was a different question before regarding the metrics here. Is the metrics, the visual that you have on the screen, a standard one or a Deneb one?
Yeah, great question. So there actually is a little symbol. This is built off the Google Analytics report that I use. So I have a little icon down here where you can click, and that will take you to Daniel Marsh-Patrick's page. He built this, I think, sometime last year because I like heat maps. This is by day of week, hour of day. It shows you distributions of where the values are. But obviously, color isn't. It's a great way to show clustering, but not necessarily size. So separately, he built in a bar chart that's around the edges that actually gives you the qualitative size for each of these values. So the bar here at the top, that's for 12 a.m. This one at the bottom is for Tuesday, but you can see the relative height differences and also the heat map distribution. So it's a combo chart that that he helped me build with Deneb. And in exchange, like I told him that if it's in my Google Analytics report that's on AppSource, I will happily like put a big button here for people to go to your website and hopefully get some traffic. It's one of the coolest custom visual builders for Power BI. It's a custom visual in the AppSource store that lets you build custom visuals off of an open source Vega visuals library that actually was made by University of Washington. Yeah.
Charticulator on steroids.
Yes, and Charticulator, they've officially said as of the December blog post that it's not retiring it, but we're also not actively developing it at the moment.
I feel like it's like Power Pivot. We are still keeping it, but we're not developing it too much.
Yep. And Daniel, honestly, like everything that's missing from that, Daniel tries to build into this, and he's put thousands of hours into it. So I like he deserves honestly like 2 MVPs for for building a tool like that. He's a really great guy. But yeah, good question. And yeah, fantastic.
I remember I saw one time some heat map done by you in a matrix visual, and it was a discussion in the chat whether it's that one, standard matrix or the Deneb, even if there is a hint with the logo on the bottom right.
I did build this originally using layered visuals. So I had a column chart, bar chart, and I just layered them and grouped them together. But then I had Daniel help me build this single one, which actually, like, you can even use this to do cross filtering too, which is pretty cool.
Really cool.
Yeah, super cool visual. All right, I want to click off of it now. There we go. Okay, so back to the last conversation that I want to talk to you about curation. So icons, important. We've talked about hiding them entirely. We've talked about hiding individual ones. Now, another thing that's important on this, not only the scan process, like what icons are going to show up here, also we have to be very careful. If we're going to layer visuals, and like I said, I'm okay doing it. Don't put 10 objects on your page. 2 to 4 is fine. Just a couple of squares and containers to, again, organize and segment your report. But we want to make sure that this doesn't happen. So by default, an object can pop forward and basically show in front of others if you click it, because it becomes an active object. And obviously that is not a nice user experience to have. So a very important setting that we need to set anytime we are layering objects is you need to go to, that's new. They have a padding option now, which I don't remember seeing before. So getting distracted though. Advanced options, maintain layer order. This was added about 2 years ago. So if you turn that on, and again, sadly, cannot be observed in Power BI Desktop because look, it's still popping up. I've turned this on, it pops up. Also, you can still see that those header icons are showing up. So once you're back in reading mode, then it's fixed. So I can click as many times as I want. Doesn't matter. It's not going to pop up anymore. I've essentially blended it into the background. So that's what the maintain layer order does. Now, technically, it only needs to be turned on for an object that is behind another object. If this is already the frontmost object, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be turned on because there's nothing for it to pop in front of. But in the selection pane, if I open that up, selection pane, the text box here. So anything that's above it, it's not going to pop in front of it. It stays at that position. And I'll get to the selection pane conversation in a minute, but that's essentially what that it does. And it's a very important setting. Like I said, if at any point you have any objects that are slightly overlapping and you don't want any pop-ups to occur, that's a very important setting to have. All right, so we've talked about header icons. We've talked about pop-ups. Another big one is the filters pane. So a couple of things that we want to discuss on this. So starting the conversation, and again on this idea that the filters pane should ideally only ever show 2 scopes. Filters on this page, any filter you want the user to apply to the page itself, filters on all pages. And we want a couple of things to be maintained here. The only things that the user should ever see are filters that they should or can adjust. So metric is not session title right here. Without going into the detail of why that was applied, that's a developer filter. Based on the design of the model, I applied a filter to get rid of a particular metric type that did not make sense for these visuals from this field parameter. So it's here and it's locked, but the user doesn't need to know this. They don't need to see it here. it's locked and they're never going to adjust it. So there's no need to have this visible. So those are the situations where, generally speaking, if I lock a filter, I'm almost always going to want to hide it as well. That will ensure that if I go back to reading view, there we go. That filter is not going to show up anymore. Now, a couple of other things to mention as well, too, is I have seen this happen on a pretty regular basis, where if a column gets renamed or deleted from your model, it doesn't necessarily disappear from your filters list. You're going to get it showing up with a bunch of little warning icons. So I can't use it. It's broken, but that is not something we want the user to see. So it's good to review your filters list to make sure that you don't have any of those visible. So getting rid of those. I do, in a perfect world, it would be really nice that if you delete a column, if it's in a visual, maybe have it disappear, but there's kind of two schools of thought. The warning icon does help it tell you, the developer, something's wrong or something's broken. Especially because if you delete a column and a visual breaks, it's very clear that that visual is broken. If it just was to delete the column from the visual and it kept working, it's going to be a lot harder for you to go find whatever columns that might have been associated with which visuals. So you can kind of argue the case either way of whether or not you like that, but it is easy to miss those items in the filters pane. So we're curating this down. We've hidden locked filters. We've gotten rid of bad filters. Now everything that left that is in this filters list is related to things that we would want to hide or show for the users. And we're trying to get rid of things that we don't want to have visible for that they can't basically interact with. Now this works in tandem with this feature in the visual header. So the filters on this visual, there's a few things in here that we want to get rid of. Again, very useful feature, but I've seen a lot of reports where you hover over this and you get like a list of 10 filters that are being applied because you have a page level filter that was applied but not hidden. You have multiple visual level filters that were applied by the developer. Again, the user can't adjust them, but they're showing up in this list. So ideally, what I want is I want this list to be empty except for filters that the user can adjust. So data as of, that just determines the end date. Does my data go through the current month? Does it go through the prior month? The user can change that. So I want that to show up in the filters list here. Metric is page views. That changes based off of the user selection here. So I also want that to show up. Now source, top 5 by metric selection. One, that's a red flag that I look for to make sure that like whatever it's filtering on, we want to have the title reflect that. So a part of the auditing process is always just making sure that the titles are named appropriately, but I don't want that showing up in my list. So I'm going to go back to edit, select this. I'm going to go to the filters in this visual. We're going to hide that. And we're going to ensure that the title of the visual. There we go. Top 5. Excellent. Go back to reading view. Beautiful. Now we are left with nothing but the items that the user can configure. So it's a clean list, easy to read, and the user will understand exactly what they have done to make adjustments onto the page. Any other like filter selection. So they make a selection here to, let's actually do this one. Here we go. So they select that, filters in this visual. Now, sometimes the automatic filters can look a little bit complicated, but at least they can observe their selection. So it's the best that they can get based off of whatever is currently being adjusted or set onto the page itself. There we go, get that to clear back out. So that's my goal for this, is only user configurable filters. And there are changes coming forward where they're going to clean this up a little bit, but this is the best that we can build it given the limitations of how it's designed today. Now, as I mentioned, the filter pane should have 2 scopes generally for the users: filters on this page, filters on all pages. Now, we don't want this to happen. So if I click a visual, this is exactly what I do not want my end user to see. Filters on this visual. These are filters for a single visualization. This is not something the user should adjust. None of these things should show up, and then it pushes all of the filters that they want to interact with down the list. So unfortunately, this is the slowest, fastest process to do this today, but I have to go in, I have to select edit. I need to click a visualization like this, and then I quite literally will need to go and hide these one at a time. And I wish there was a faster way to do this, but this is honestly the method today. I'm trying to work with another MVP to hopefully create a tool that can do this automatically, but this is the fastest process to clean these up. So those are hidden, and you have to do that per visual, unfortunately. But now, if I come to the visual and I click it, beautiful. We're already pulling this up. It is keeping the visual level filters hidden, and they're not getting a bunch of extra filters popping up in their filters pane. So it helps to keep a nice, clean experience, and for this view to stay focused on the filters that they care to see. So that's a big change that I recommend for people to do, is make sure that your visual level filters stay hidden. All right. So what I'm going to do now. Here. Sure, go ahead.
In your experience, having the filter pane on or off, is it, I don't know, confusing for the new users, or is it worthwhile to hide it from time to time, or
depends on the audience.
What's your experience?
Depends on the audience. So if the people are familiar with Power BI, I have the default to be closed. If they are new to Power BI, because as you can see, the web browser has a lot of room. Like I can have my pages open, I can have my filters pane open, and I still get a pretty big canvas for my report page. So I will also consider publishing, because this is the default experience. So when you publish, you can choose to have it open or closed. So for people less familiar with Power BI, I will have the default be filter pane open, and then they can close it if they want to. So I would much rather have it open for the newer users. Experienced users, it defaults to close, and they can just come access it if they want to. So it's kind of my school of thought for those.
Any option when you would hide it completely?
Only if there's a couple slicers that they need. It depends. So the
one buck.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how many filters they need. If they have like they need a date range and product category, just 2 slicers in the page is fine for that. But if they need product category, subcategory, product name, product SKU, customer city, customer state, customer country, 15, 20 different filters, I'll probably have a couple of the key ones on the page, and then the rest of them are going to be in the filters pane. So I use both. Commonly used ones go on the page. The less common ones go into the filter pane as additional options. But it keeps the report canvas focusing on the visualizations and not everything else that you would need. So it basically just boils down to the number of filters. I use slicers first, and then the filter pane is supplementary when additional filters are needed that would otherwise clutter up the page. Good question.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I want to do is switch to Power BI Desktop for some of these other conversations. Window, this one. All right. So what we're going to do with the conversation here is another thing that I kind of look for, and I see as a pretty common pitfall with people, is not organizing their filters pane. Their selection pane. And this really boils down to a practice that I learned even back in the day with my Power Pivot experience. And so there's one of those where you get that just a little bit of an urge to sneeze, but not quite. Okay, I'm good. So even back when I was doing Power Pivot models in Excel 10 years ago, I was taught very early on, like, name your tables. So when I open a workbook, is your table on sheet 6, is it called table 35, or is it called sales by customer segment, or whatever it is? Friendly names for your objects goes a long way for organization, and also just it makes development easier if you're connecting slicers to tables and anything related to that. So what I would consider as a much more cleaned up environment would be something like this. Oops, didn't want to open that. There you go. So we have a selection that is organized where everything is grouped together. We have a much cleaner selection of items that are organized by theme and by location. So you get a much cleaner experience of everything that is loading onto the page with the objects that you are basically rendering. So this goes a long way to providing just general organization and almost notes in a way, because the groups show that these are associated together. Plus, they can be moved together, they can be copied and pasted to different report pages. So there's a lot of benefits to grouping and naming objects. So it's one of the first things that I look for, like for a pro developer, is Did you name objects in your selection pane? And I'd argue that like if you consider yourself to be an advanced Power BI report builder, at least, that's one of those checkboxes that I think goes with the title is proper ordering and proper design of basically the things that we just mentioned here, and also spacing to a degree. So one big thing that's, at least today, something to be aware of. Let's see if I can open this selection pane. It's big enough. I'm gonna make this nice and big. So you have to be aware of how users will open your report and at what resolution. You see what's happening to my header icons right now? They're showing up behind the visual behind it. So they auto scale and move that up there. Notice that these icon sizes do not change regardless how big my canvas is. Same exact size for the icons. So those are determined by the scale of your computer. So the scale set by Windows is determining basically how big those are. So if they open it in a small enough window, it doesn't show up in the title anymore. Once the room isn't big enough, it's going to show up behind this other object. So sometimes you might have a consideration for leaving enough room between these or anything else, but just be aware of the type of screen that a person's going to open this on. And I mean, I've had many clients ask me like the icons are having an issue. Full screen fixes that, but there's definitely conversations that have to happen. I do hope that at some point there's going to be an option to scale the header icons with the rest of the report. It would be really nice, honestly, like if you have a smaller report, those icons adjust accordingly. Today, that's not a feature, but until we have that, you just need to be aware of what device are people going to be looking at this on, because if you build this on a 4K monitor at 100% scale, it's probably going to look pretty different on a 1080p monitor at 100% scale. So testing on different screens or asking for feedback does go a long way to part of this design process, especially with those little header icon pop-ups, which we're hiding as much as we can, but they are still useful for some visuals to have. Just be aware of the screen that they are being looked at when people are viewing these reports. All right, and we is it half past 20 that we're going until, or?
As you wish.
Okay,
as you wish.
So,
there is no hard limit.
Okay, I have a few other conversations I want to finish up.
Okay, no problem.
So another thing of organization and design that I look for with a lot of the reporting and data sets that I do is because from the front end, we've already discussed a lot of ways that we can curate the report experience. We want the report to be as simple and as intuitive as possible with these interactions. Similarly, with the data model, we want that to be as easy to use as possible. The fields list to be organized and cleaned up. One thing that I recommend a lot is making a folder specifically to hold your calculations. We'll also talk about how to even folder and organize the measures even further, but it's really important to organize this fields list so when people are going to connect to your data set, like a Power BI data set option, you want them to easily understand your model and all of the fields that are basically being exposed to a degree. So one thing that's very useful is that measures folder. If you've not built one before, it's very easy to do using just the enter data button. I'll quickly build one in here. Now, I call my folder DAX. I will say if you try to name it measures, you'll actually have it put into your model as measures 1. So I'm going to go ahead and call it measures for now and select load. We're going to watch what happens when this actually loads to my model. Measures 2, that's actually the name that it shows up as. So technically in the back end, there's already a table called measures that all of your DAX calculations go into. So you can't call it that, which is the reason that it calls it measures 2, just as kind of like a little FYI. But yeah, just call this DAX, or I'll call it metrics. Let's do that. And then as long as you have one or more calculation here, I'm just going to create a quick and easy DAX measure. Measure equals 1. That's fine. So you can do two things once you've done this. One or more calculation in there. You can either hide or delete this column. So I can right click, delete column 1. It automatically changes the icon. moves it to the top of the page. So it separates your physical tables and columns from your logical metrics. Really useful feature to have, lets you organize all of your calculations this way. Now, to further this thought, coming to the relationship view, these measures can also be added to a folder as well. So you have that display folder option. Now, the easy introductory version of this is, folder A. So you can put it in one folder, but you also have an option for subfolders as well. So a backslash folder subfolder A. And it can go as many folders deep as you want to, but we can go one step even further than that. So let's assume that this measure is like, it was actuals minus budget. Let's just pretend that that's the calculation that this is. So does that go in the actuals folder or does that go in the budget folder? Which logical folder should this be assigned to? So what we can do, actuals, yep, budget, semicolon. So a semicolon between the two puts it in both. So there's only one measure in the model. Notice that if I select the single one, it selects both. So if I make an adjustment, let's just make a change here. I'm going to make that 12. It's technically, think of it like a file shortcut. There is only one stored calculation in the model. It just displays it twice. If I go to a new page, if I add it from budget, it adds it from both. If I add it from actuals, it adds it from both. So one calculation in the model that basically is just shown in two locations. And that can be two. That also could have been 3 folders. Many folders as you want to put it into. You just got to use a semicolon each time. So you could also put in actuals, analytics, budget. So you can organize your calculations and in as many ways as you want to. It exposes that and displays it very nicely. But the goal really for you as a takeaway is that it's less important about how you choose to organize it. But if you're going to build a model for yourself or other people where you really want it to be easy to use, using measure tables, using folders inside of those tables, and then folders, subfolders, or multi-foldering will allow you to group your calculations together, and then you can have things that will make a lot more sense at this level and much more organized versus having a giant list of calculations. So that's usually what I would recommend to have with a lot of these is group these together into some type of logical organization that then gives you a much easier navigation experience for people that are looking at the report itself. And on top of that, we have similar concepts that we can actually do in Power Query, and that will be, I think, one of my last things that I'll talk about today for this. So going up into my Power Query editor, a beautiful thing that we can do in here, I go to doesn't really matter too much. Let's pick one of them. Okay. So any step that you have in Power Query,
the Power Query editor is not visible. It's on
the
screen.
That's right, because I have to show the window. Here we are. Okay.
Cool.
So any step that we have in Power Query, one, we can actually easily add notes and organization to these. So a lovely little pro tip for this is the fact that if you have a step that's doing a certain thing that maybe needs some further explanation, previously, the way I used to have to add notes in Power Query years ago, you'd have to come to the advanced editor. I'd have to come into here. You'd have to type notes in here like this. And this is how you would be able to leave notes in your report or in your query. You'd have to use the advanced editor for that. Now, the pro tip for this, without having to touch the code, is you can actually, for any step, right-click, properties, and the site properties itself, oh wait, pop up, oh wait, notes. In the description of the property, it lets you as well be able to type it in there. So it's kind of buried in the properties menu, but there's a description window that just lets you type in text and it automatically codes it for you. It puts it into the advanced editor right here. So you don't actually have to script it at all. You just need to use the properties button, type it in, and you get notes added automatically. Similarly, for any query, you also get a notes option in there, which will then let you type in and get a little tooltip pop-up. So I I will be the first to tell you that I very much do not like having to take notes. Most people don't. I do it because it's needed. The clients certainly appreciate having notes about the model, but anytime that I can add a comment directly in the measure, anytime that I can put notes in the property of an applied step or on a query, I much prefer to build the notes directly into the tool itself, using the description in DAX as well. So just coming back to the model for a quick second. Here. Descriptions in here as well. If you have something, you know, this is subtracting actuals from budget, something like that in the description. And then if anybody's connecting to your report, same thing. We get a tooltip that pops up that explains what they're looking at. So it's important to take documentation and notes, but if you can build it into the tool itself, it provides a lot more context, and you don't have to sit there and compare a Word document with this. You can have everything built into that. So notes and foldering and organization goes a long way for increasing adoption. But again, like anytime somebody's getting handed off this model or this report, if you're passing this off to another developer, they will greatly appreciate this extra context that can come through with this. So and it reduces the amount of official documentation that I need to take separately, which, like I said, is just nobody particularly likes to do that. So it's my little way of adding breadcrumb trails around the report itself. Last thing that I'll mention is a bit of
before you move from the description. Do you usually add also the DAX calculation inside the description so that the end users see how it was calculated, or you don't recommend it?
Sometimes I actually, like, that was one of my videos from a few years ago on that, where there's a C# script that you can run in Tabular Editor where it automatically takes your measure, and it's basically just doing this. It would be like
getting the measurement and
this. There we go. It'd be like that, or the whatever the formula is, and then they can see it when they connect to your model. So yeah, I do that sometimes. It depends on how complicated they are, because if I have a model with a lot of really complicated DAX, the average business user is not going to know at all how to read that. So it is useful. I normally only do that if I know the people who are looking at it know DAX. But otherwise, I think that Darren recently did an interesting blog post where he talked about he used ChatGPT to write a description for every measure based off the code. So it provides a English description explaining what the measure is supposed to be doing. So and that's an automated script. So that's I think a cool way to actually use ChatGPT to auto document your model. And I found that as a pretty useful utilization of it.
And one more question regarding the Power Query side. Do you usually use groups or folders there?
That's going to be my next. That was my next demo. So let me go ahead and hop into that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Yeah. So the last thing that you were mentioning here is the ability to use groups as well. So there we go. That allows you to organize and sort a lot better. A big issue is the fact that we don't have the search box here at the top. So it does make it a lot more difficult to find your queries in a giant list, because you have no way to filter and search. There's no wildcard search, unlike the fields list that's in the Power BI desktop fields list. So this does make the queries harder to navigate if you don't have groups. I usually organize them with an ETL process, so extract, transform, load. So I have my data source queries, my staging tables that are usually referenced. So tables like these ones would be in a staging group, and then I have a loaded data model. So those are the actual tables that are physically loaded. And that's usually how I segment them out between each of those. But groups do go a long way, again, to organizing and provide cleanup. And one of those other things that I look for with a developer is, did they provide groupings? Do they have a long list of queries? how well organized is their Power Query editor? Yeah, absolutely. What I'll do now is pull up some links and everything, and then I want to open it up for some general questions for people. So let me get my slides back up. Where is it? Right here. Okay, and then share this one. We'll have a few slides to show up. This QR code will take you to the main website that I have for my company. I'll also have a blog raffle sign up, excuse me, as well, that you can enter, which will be for winning a half an hour of consulting with me if you get your name drawn from a hat as a thank you for attending. But I have I have a course and lots of services that I provide that are related to Power BI. So if you're interested at all in any training or consulting, there's plenty of material, both for self-paced or instructor-led, that we provide as a company. But otherwise, I encourage you to check out my YouTube channel. You'll find the link to that on my website. I do a recorded video about once a week and a live stream as well about once a week. I just had Matthias Tierbach on my stream for talking about the new Tyndall language on Tuesday. I actually will have Asgeir, who will be doing a stream on Friday as well on a lot of really cool Power BI topics. So I have about 105 streams that I've done at this point. So lots of cool stuff. So I encourage you to go check those out, and please obviously feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. There's anytime you have like a question about Power BI, I like to try to help out the community. So if you have any thoughts or insights or just curiosities, always feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to have a conversation with that as well. But I'll put up the blog sign up raffle QR code. So like I said, that will enter you into a drawing to win a half an hour of consulting with me. Feel free to ask me anything about Power BI, DAX, reporting, basically just having half an hour to kind of pick my brain or get assistance, or just be able to ask questions about the platform, licensing, anything kind of underneath that. And I can help guide you a little bit on some conversations. But otherwise, are there any remaining questions in the comments of the chat at all, or if anybody wants to come off mute and ask as well?
No, not really. There were some comments. How do you treat the descriptions when you have it in different languages, when the developer has the Power BI in a different language and the C# in English? Well, you will have to adapt, probably.
Yes, and there is I know people have been using ChatGPT as well to do that. I've not had to write it in other languages myself. That's usually been a developer that I hire to do that. But there are some automated tools that will basically start automatically doing language translation for modeling. You'll be able to plug the API into Tabular Editor and probably do some automations around that. So that's if you need to do anything like that, I would probably look into the ChatGPT route, getting a license key and using the API. But it seems like there's a lot of good automations that can come from that.
Mm-hmm. I saw ChatGPT already included or integrated in Excel, so you can ask normal questions inside Excel and you'll get tables out of it, and it's
You mean
really
the
cool.
Office? You mean the Office Copilot, right?
No. It was before the Copilot. The Copilot is something that it's coming for now, and not everybody will have it unless you have Microsoft 365 and so on. But at Global Excel Summit in February, Leila Garani, one of the Excel MVPs, already integrated the ChatGPT APIs inside Excel. So she was asking questions in
okay.
Excel.
So it's not native to Microsoft. You had to add it.
No. It was separate, but it's working exactly like you said.
Oh yeah.
Getting the APIs inside Tabular Editor, there are lots of possibilities.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and if you wait 6 months, I'm sure you're going to probably have a lot of these buttons built in. So it just depends on if you want to code yourself and have to get an API, or just wait for Microsoft to release some of the products. They invested $10 billion in OpenAI, so their Copilot is going to be everywhere in the Microsoft tools.
Exactly, and I was totally impressed by the PowerPoint Copilot, for example. When I saw the demo, it was just wow.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's going to help a lot for me to make content for sure.
Yeah, for sure. If anyone has any additional question, now is the time, because afterwards we'll go through 5 minutes on the enterprise DNA raffle, and
Sure.
then we will wrap up, and whoever wants to stay a bit more can stay afterwards, and after we stop the recording.
Excellent. Yeah, let's do that.
I don't see any additional questions in the chat. If you have any questions, please raise your hand.
Quick one
Or
from me,
just-
Reid, is
Sure.
sort of very quick tips and tricks that you found for data models, because we know sort of get the data model right, everything on the front end is so much easier. But have you sort of got a nice little easy tips and tricks from a data model sort of review point of view?
Yes. So I mean, like just as the easiest takeaway without having to go into a demo again, I'd say probably the best practices analyzer is the easiest thing to run against your model to look at all the problems to fix it up. That's built into Tabular Editor. If you want a book, yeah, but like the quickest and easiest way to audit a model is the best practices analyzer. It's open source. It basically you pull the list off of GitHub, and it just tells you all these warnings and problems that you can go quickly fix. And it even has scripts to automatically do them as well. So like hiding key columns, things along the organization that I mentioned for modeling, with the measures folder and all that. But that's an easy starting point, I'd say, as a quick anecdote on that.
They're really nice when they do a best practice analyzer for sort of the data model, one for Power Query, one for the sort of the sort of do an all-in-one, and then, like you say, a report analyzer as well.
Yep, it's being worked on. I just don't know when it's going to come out, but there is someone working on a report analyzer, and also Michael Kowalski does have a report analyzer at the moment that does work pretty well too.
And it's integrated in Tabular Editor, or you can do it, right?
No, Tabular Editor only works on the data model, not the report.
Yeah, true.
But yes, it can't touch the report layout file. But Michael Kowalski has a report practices analyzer that does do some stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and Oakley saying about the measure killer, the external tool.
I'm getting the link. So he did a stream with me last year. So where is the chat? This is the Google's horrible with your stupidly long.
I saw the newest version 2 weeks ago. It's really, really cool, and they've improved it a lot. Since,
Tabular Editor or?
No, the measure killer external tool.
Oh, with Gregor. Yep.
And as far as I understood, it will be included in the Power BI tips ops organizer, the installer for several external tools in the following weeks.
Yes, 100%. He's built a fantastic tool for that.
Any other question before we go to the raffle? If not, let's move quickly with the raffle, and let me share my screen. As we are a Power BI group, I'm doing a Power BI report to see the data, because we are collecting it with the Microsoft form, getting a flow, writing the data in a SharePoint, and then connecting with a Power BI to that SharePoint list. So for now, we have 11 raffle participants, 19 answers. Let's see who are the 11 ones using, of course, another Power BI option. Go to the Power Query, and I already have a query prepared with the participants, 11 participants. Let's go back and use our long used wheel of names to do the drawing. So let's paste the participants. shuffle the names, and let me see, am I also sharing the sound? I'm not sure.
No sound.
I think I should have it here somewhere. Let's see. And we are spinning. I get the first winner. Laszlo, congrats. You're our first winner. Let's shuffle again. The remaining names. And spin the wheel. Tibor from Hungary. Congrats. You're our second winner. I will send you an email after the meetup to confirm your email addresses. And so we can register for the enterprise DNA. Reid, thank you again for accepting our invitation and for the great session you had today.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you for having me on.
Really looking forward to the next time you are coming on Romania Power BI user group. And
yeah,
everyone, thank you all for joining. Please go to Reid's YouTube channel and follow his weekly live sessions because they are really, really cool. And you have a lot of learning to do from Reid. So thank you all for joining. Thank you, Reid, again. And I will stop the recording now. And whoever wants to stay a bit more, feel free to stay and we can chat.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and enjoy the rest of your night.
Anytime. Anytime you want to present something, we are here.
Perfect. I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Cheers, Reid. Thanks.
Cheers. Yeah. Thanks, everyone.